Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're looking at a story that is frankly as tragic as it is absolutely crucial to understand. It's a chain of events from a single day in 1977 that completely revolutionized the way we travel.
You know, there's this chilling proverb in the aviation industry. Safety rules are written in blood. It's incredibly heavy, but as you'll see today, it's 100% true. Literally every safety check, every protocol, even those frustrating delays you sit through at the airport today, they all exist because of the terrifying reality we're about to unpack. So here's the central mystery. How exactly does a suitcase bomb, exploding a full 100 kilometers away, end up causing the deadliest plane crash in human history? It sounds insane, right? Like some impossible butterfly effect? Well, we're going to trace this exact chain of compounding errors to see how the unthinkable actually happened.
Part 1. A bomb and a diversion. The butterfly effect begins.
Okay, let's start our timeline on March 27, 1977. At 11:30 a.m., two men from a separatist group called MPIAC secretly plant a ticking suitcase bomb in a flower shop at the Las Palmas airport, over on Gran Canaria Island. At 1:15 p.m., after a pretty terrifying warning call to the airport switchboard, the bomb goes off. Now, thankfully, there were no casualties. But here's the catch. Investigators replay that warning call and realize the caller said bombs, plural. Terrified there's a second explosive, authorities just completely shut the airport down. So by 1:38 p.m., 6 large passenger planes that were just about to land are suddenly stuck circling in a holding pattern. Running low on fuel, these planes are abruptly diverted to a nearby, much smaller island, Tenerife.
Part 2. Trapped at Tenerife, a dangerous parking lot.
Among these diverted planes are two absolute behemoths, Boeing 747 jumbo jets. You've got Pan Am Flight 1736 with 380 passengers led by Captain Victor Grubbs, and KLM Flight 4805 carrying 234 passengers piloted by Captain Van Zanten. They're sent to Los Rodeos Airport at Tenerife, and let me tell you, this facility was totally overwhelmed. They only had 2 controllers on duty, 0 ground radar, meaning they literally couldn't see the planes on their screens and had to rely purely on radio chatter. Plus, the local mountain geography created this orographic effect, basically making the airport prone to these sudden, incredibly dense walls of fog. And the real kicker, it only had a single runway with 1 parallel taxiway. This was a dangerous parking lot that was never, ever meant to handle a massive influx of jumbo jets.
Part 3. The pressure of time and a captain's anxiety.
Now, we really need to understand the psychological pressure cooking in the cockpit. The KLM pilot, Captain Van Zanten, he wasn't just some guy. He was KLM's chief flying instructor, literally the face of the airline in their promotional magazines. But right now, he was sweating. Thanks to incredibly strict Dutch aviation laws, if he exceeded his specific duty time limits because of this massive delay, he could actually lose his license. He could even face jail time. So to save time later in the day, Van Zanten makes a choice. He decides to refuel his massive jet right there on the Tenerife tarmac instead of waiting until they reach their final destination. This single decision pumps 55,000 liters of fuel into his plane, adding 50 extra tons of weight. But the worst part? That refueling process adds a completely fatal 30-minute delay.
And this is where the dramatic irony just becomes agonizing. Literally minutes after the KLM plane starts its 30-minute refueling, the word comes down. The bomb threat is clear, and the Las Palmas airport is back open. The Pan Am flight is parked directly behind KLM, completely ready to go right that second. But they're stuck. The Pan Am crew actually gets out, walks onto the tarmac, and measures the space to see if they can just squeeze past the refueling KLM jet. They are short by exactly 12 feet. So 380 Pan Am passengers just have to sit there trapped behind this massive KLM plane, all because of a 12-foot margin.
Now, during this incredibly frustrating wait, something crazy happens. A KLM passenger named Rabina, who actually lived nearby, decides she's just had enough. She argues with the airline staff, basically walks right out of the airport to go visit her boyfriend, which strictly violates airline rules. But by breaking that protocol, she inadvertently saves her own life. She ends up being the absolute only survivor of the 235 people who originally boarded that KLM flight.
Part 4. The deadly radio silence. Blind in the fog.
Okay, so the KLM plane finally finishes refueling, and both of these massive planes are ordered to taxi down the exact same active runway to get into their takeoff positions. Pan Am is told to exit the runway halfway down at a taxiway called C3, but in all the confusion, they just struggle to find it. And then, the environment completely turns on them. At 4:54 p.m., KLM finishes fueling. But by 5:02 p.m., that notorious mountain fog we talked about, it rolls in thick. Visibility instantly drops to just 300 meters. The control tower is completely blinded. And then, making matters even worse, at 5:05 p.m., the runway center lights just fail. Remember, there's no ground radar here. Everyone is completely blind in the fog, relying 100% on crackly radio communications to figure out where they are.
The tension here is just unbelievable. First, the KLM plane reaches the far end of the runway and spins 180 degrees, staring straight back into the fog. Then, a deeply rushed, anxious Captain Van Zanten actually pushes the throttle forward to take off without full clearance. His co-pilot, clearly terrified, slams the brakes to stop him, scrambles to get the route clearance, and then radios the tower with this really ambiguous phrase, "We are now at takeoff." Hearing that vague phrase, the air traffic control tower naturally assumes the KLM jet is just sitting there, stationary, waiting for the final green light. So the tower shoots back this absolutely crucial, life-saving instruction. They say, "Okay, stand by for takeoff. I will call you." It was a direct, explicit order to hold their position.
At the exact same moment, inside the Pan Am cockpit, the lost crew realizes they are still on the active runway, sitting like ducks right in the direct path of the KLM plane. They desperately key the mic and transmit this warning to everyone. We are still taxiing down the runway. Now, if the KLM pilots hear either the tower's order or the Pan Am crew's warning, the disaster is completely avoided.
But here is the devastating blow. 3.75 seconds. Because both the control tower and the Pan Am crew press their radio microphone buttons in the exact same fraction of a second, the radio signals overlapped. They completely canceled each other out. So inside that KLM cockpit, instead of hearing two desperate warnings, they heard absolutely nothing. Just 3.75 seconds of high-pitched static.
Part 5. The devastating collision. Reaching V1 speed. Even through that static, the KLM flight engineer gets this terrible feeling and asks Captain Van Zanten if the Pan Am plane is clear of the runway. Van Zanten, super confident and rushing against the clock, emphatically says yes. He slams the throttles to maximum. This massive, heavy plane accelerates blindly into the thick fog, rapidly hitting V1 speed. That's the decision speed, the point of no return where you're going too fast to abort the takeoff. At 5:06 and 49 seconds, ripping out of the dense fog, the landing lights of the KLM jet emerge, hurtling straight at the Pan Am plane. The Pan Am crew screams, jamming their throttles to full power, trying to swerve off the runway into the grass at 19 miles per hour. Captain Van Zanten finally sees them. He violently yanks back on the yoke to force his plane into the sky. But remember those 50 extra tons of fuel? The tail drags violently across the tarmac. He cannot clear them. The KLM's engines and landing gear shear directly through the upper deck of the Pan Am jet. A massive inferno erupts, leaving 583 people dead, with only 61 miraculous survivors from the Pan Am flight.
And here is the ultimate heartbreaking tragedy of this entire butterfly effect. Exactly 4 minutes after the crash, the dense mountain fog completely lifted. The skies totally cleared. If that refueling hadn't eaten up 30 minutes, or if they had just waited 4 more minutes, every single person would have gone home safely.
So the massive question we're left with is, how did the airline's absolutely greatest pilot make its deadliest mistake? When news of the crash finally reached KLM headquarters, their immediate reaction was to send their top safety expert to investigate. But in this incredibly dark twist of irony, they quickly realized they couldn't, because their top safety expert was Captain Van Zanten.
Part 6. Rules Written in Blood. The Autopsy of a System.
This single disaster fundamentally triggered a massive cultural revolution in aviation. Back in the old days, the captain was basically viewed as God in the cockpit. Co-pilot Mers actually knew they didn't have clearance, but he was simply too intimidated to aggressively challenge his former instructor. Today, directly because of Tenerife, we have what's called crew resource management. Co-pilots are now rigorously trained and strictly required to challenge authority if they see a safety risk. That kind of deadly deferential silence is literally no longer allowed.
A bomb 100 kilometers away, 50 extra tons of fuel, a missing 12 feet of taxiway space, and 3.75 seconds of radio static. There wasn't one single villain that day. It was just a catastrophic system failure. It was minor inconveniences, intense time pressure, and just sheer unimaginable bad luck, all perfectly, fatally aligning.
Which leaves us with a final thought to chew on. The next time you're sitting on an airplane and the captain gets on the intercom to announce a delay for a double check, or you're just sitting on the tarmac waiting endlessly for clearance, will you remember the 583 lives that paid for those rules? Because as we said right at the start, aviation safety rules truly are written in blood. Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.